Self-Help SatNav is brought to you by Open Forwards. Get the latest insights into stress, anxiety, depression, relationships, work, time out, and getting stuff done by swooping over to www.openforwards.com. Hi and welcome to episode number 5 in Self-Help SatNav, the show that lets you discover self-help that works. You can take a free 8-day course over at Open Forwards that teaches you 5 daily helpers to help you feel and cope better. Just head on over to openforwards.com/health wellbeing course. So today is episode number 5 and we're beginning a mini-series today based on the book Reinventing Your Life. So why am I starting a mini-series in this podcast show? And I think it's because there's so much in this book that's of great value. It's full of useful information and there's a lot to learn here. It's not a doorstep of a book. You won't feel like you're reading Tolstoy. It's just that it's rich, and I think a mini-series on this book will help you identify whether this book is right for you. And secondly, by talking about the key lessons here, I can begin to help you figure out whether you have a life trap and what you can do to begin to break free from it. I'll talk a bit more about life traps in a moment, but let me tell you first about how I'm going to run this mini-series. So this is episode number 1 of the Reinventing Your Life mini-series. And at this stage, I'm planning on 6 episodes in total. I'm not going to cover each life trap named out in this book. Instead, I'm going to focus on the ones that I've come across most of all in my therapy work. The ones that for some reason seem to come up for most people. The life traps that seem to get people stuck the most. Now, this mini-series isn't going to quite run in sequence in that I'm going to release episodes on other topics featuring some great interviews that I've got lined up over the next several months, which I'm really excited about. So this mini-series is one that we're going to dip in and out of over the course of the next several months. Of course, you can listen back to all of the episodes once they've been released by either subscribing in iTunes or visiting openforwards.com/series/self-help satnav. If you have an Android device like me and you'd like to listen to it on your phone, you can't use iTunes, of course, but you can use other podcast apps. My favorite is Castbox, which works fantastically for me. I listen to lots of podcast episodes on that. There may be others out there that work very well. I just haven't tried them out. So have a look around. So let's get started on today's episode, which is an introductory overview and lesson 1 in this mini-series called Reinventing Your Life. Now, Reinventing Your Life is a book based on schema therapy, which is written by Jeffery and Janet Klosko. It's been an influential book, to say the least, for me personally and professionally. It's helped me to see through the fog when I felt most lost in my client work and trying to support them with their struggles. So how can this book help you? This book is all about life traps, not to be confused with honey traps or mouse traps. A life trap is patterns of behavior in your life, which mean you get stuck with something. So this could be in your relationships, for example. Maybe you worry about being abandoned, or you mistrust people, thinking they most likely have an ulterior motive. So you might avoid getting close to people, or you try to control them. It could be about something else. It could be about your view of yourself. For example, that you're unimportant, or that you don't fit in, or that there's something wrong with you. And so as a result, you might try to present or create a more appealing version of yourself. So these here are just a couple of examples of life traps. In this book, Reinventing Your Life, they talk about 11 life traps in all. And today, I'm going to mention them one by one, just briefly, so you can get an idea of whether this book is going to be of use to you. So I mentioned the authors here, Jeffery Young. Now, he's a psychologist working in New York, and following his training in CBT, he talks about that he noticed some people do well and others do less well. The differences that he noticed in whether someone did well or not was to do with the level of severity of their problem. And so he began making a list of the patterns that he had seen his clients get stuck with, and then he named these things life traps or schemas. And the way that he helps people in this approach uses a blend of psychotherapeutic models, including Gestalt, attachment, TA or transactional analysis, systemic, as well as cognitive behavioral therapy. So here in this episode, lesson number 1, I'm introducing you to these life traps. I'm going to talk about what they are, give some broad categories to the life traps. And I'll help you begin to identify how to recognize them. And then beginning to talk about something called coping styles. And these coping styles are also a big part of the problem because there's something that can keep you stuck in these life traps as well. So as well as identifying what shows up for you, what you get stuck with, it's also important to identify the way that you cope with it. And the final great thing about this book, that I think, is that it takes you through a step-by-step process of how to break free from these life traps. Okay, so let's move into looking at life traps in a bit more detail. A life trap is a combination of things. It's a memory. It's the emotions that go with that memory. It's the physical feelings or sensations associated with that emotion and memory. And it's any thoughts or beliefs that go with this experience. And this schema or life trap is something that stems from your childhood or adolescence. This life trap then turns up in your life now as an adult on a regular basis. And it will be triggered by certain circumstances or events. If you like, these events or circumstances activate it. So let's look at an example. An example might be that you recently felt upset because your partner was dismissive of a problem that you had at work. Naturally, you felt upset about it. You felt like he or she didn't care. When you think about it, you notice that you felt like this on many occasions with friends and your boss at work. You just often feel like others don't care that much about you. Now, this could be related to your childhood or teenage years. For example, if I asked you to focus in on this recent event, like you were there right now, and to connect with this upset, connect with the hurt and the sensations in your body, it may lead to a memory from when you were young. And let's say that you have a memory of your parents ignoring you when you wanted to play a game. And maybe you remember it because you felt sad. And it's quite a strong feeling that's similar to the one you're having now, and that you've had more recently about people not caring enough about you. The sensations in your body are also similar. Now, if this were the case, we could hypothesize that this has happened on many occasions to you when you were young, and you felt sad, and as though others didn't care that much about you. So this pain has stayed with you. It's led to you experiencing this pain now, recently, and it will probably show up again when something else happens that triggers these thoughts and feelings that people don't care enough. So this is what we call a life trap. Okay, so hopefully that example puts this into perspective a little. And I'm suspecting that you have some reservations, possibly, about this scenario, like maybe you don't want to blame your parents for the problems you have right now. Maybe it just seems too easy, or like you're playing the victim, or like you're not taking responsibility. I've come across these objections before, and I can understand these objections. But the point here isn't necessarily to lay blame and then leave it at that. It's more about seeing things as though they're not completely your fault, but that they aren't necessarily someone else's either. As a grown-up, you probably know quite a bit about your parents' situation than when you were younger. You know more about it now than when you were younger. And maybe they had to work a lot to support you and your brothers and sisters. Maybe one of them struggled with their own health or well-being. As adults, you get to see your parents from a different point of view, from the point of view of a grown-up. When you were young, you didn't, and you couldn't, of course. So it's just about seeing how things were and understanding that you would have been affected by that. It's inevitable. Okay, so the next thing I want to take you through here is looking at coping styles. So these are really important. Coping styles tend to be the things that keep you stuck or that help you move forwards. Young and Klosko highlight 3 coping styles, and they explain why people are affected differently by the same or similar events. For example, in the scenario I just gave you, let's say you have a brother, but your brother tends to feel like others don't care as well. But when you look at it, you have different ways of dealing with this hurt. You tend to sit quiet and go into yourself. You don't say much about it, but you feel the hurt and the pain. You also tend to stay in relationships with people who dismiss you, ignore you, or don't make you feel special. But your brother, on the other hand, he's more of a loner. He hasn't had a relationship before, and he doesn't have many friends. He tends to keep his distance from people, and he struggles with low mood and depression. So here we've got 2 different coping styles. The first, yours, in this hypothetical scenario, is what we call surrender. Surrender is when you give in to the life trap. It's when you're compliant with it. You act as if it were true, and you feel as though you can't do anything about it. Your brother doesn't do that though. He keeps people at arm's length. So his coping style is to escape the life trap. He feels that it is also true that people don't care, but instead of being with people that behave in ways where he feels like that over and over, he withdraws in order to avoid the pain, the hurt, and the sadness. So here you have 2 coping styles, surrender and escape. And the third that these authors talk about is counterattack. And counterattack is where you punish people when the feeling shows up. You try to get your own back or to hurt them. It's just your way of trying to control your own pain by making someone else feel it. It might make you feel powerful for a short period. So counterattack is about overcompensating for the life trap. You try to stand up for yourself, but you go too far in the process. You try to win, or you end up being too aggressive. And it can be quite destructive, as I'm sure you can imagine. Okay, so let's summarize what we've said so far. Number 1, life traps are ways that you get stuck over and over again. They're patterns in your behavior and your experiences. These life traps are things born in your childhood that follow you into adulthood. Number 2, understanding your life traps isn't necessarily about blaming others for your problems. It's about understanding that things happened in your past which would have an impact on anyone. And number 3, you develop coping styles which tend to be surrender, escape, or counterattack. And these coping styles can contribute to keeping you stuck. So the problem is that they stop you moving on. They're just temporary short-term solutions which don't help you heal. In chapter 5 of Reinventing Your Life, Young and Klosko outline a step-by-step process for overcoming your life traps. And it's made up of 8 different steps which you'll need to work through. Okay, so Now I'm going to slow down a bit here. I don't want to rush into these solutions, this 8 step-by-step process, because I haven't yet gone into the different types of life trap that can affect you. And I first want to outline these life traps so you can see which ones affect you. So I'm going to give you a brief description now of each one, and you can follow up these in the book to see them in more detail. And as I say in future episodes in this mini-series, I'm going to be looking at the more common life traps that I've seen in my therapy work. Number 1, the abandonment life trap. This can be summed up in the thought, please don't leave me. If you have this life trap, then you're often fearful that others will leave you. And it might not be because you think there's anything necessarily wrong with you, but it's because there's been a lack of stability in your past that you've just come to expect that others won't hang around for very long. You expect that they'll just up and leave at some point. So as a result, you might avoid getting into relationships, you might get clingy in them, or you might end them before someone has the chance to end it with you. Life trap number 2, the mistrust and abuse life trap. And this is built around the strongly held view that you cannot trust other people. You are very cautious and very wary. You might give people a chance, you might trust them, but once they show the first sign of not being able to be trusted, your predictions are confirmed. So your coping style could be to cut people out of your life. It might be to keep them around, but you often question them about whether they've had an affair or done something. Or you might do completely the opposite, which is to trust everybody, regardless, with everything. As a result, you don't act cautiously enough. Okay, number 3, life trap number 3, the emotional deprivation life trap. I'll never get the love I need. With this life trap, you often feel sad or numb in relationships. And it comes from a lack of care, love, and affection growing up. You may not realize you have it because what you've had seems very normal. But if this life trap does exist for you, your coping style might be to choose people who can't or won't love you back. Maybe you avoid others altogether, or you try to shower others with love and affection in the hope it will be reciprocated. Okay. Number 4, the social exclusion life trap. This is the strong sense of not fitting in. It's born out of childhood experiences of feeling like you just never fitted in when you were maybe at school, as well as possibly at home. So your coping styles could be to behave in ways that are different to the norm. For example, dress very differently or live very differently to the norm. Now, I don't want you to get the impression here that I'm saying anyone who acts differently to the norm has a social exclusion life trap. I don't believe that to be the case. Some people, many people in fact, are very comfortable in their independence and non-conformity. Actually, it's always been something that I've tried to strive for. The issue is about the motivation to do it, whether it's about connection with what you love, how you want to be, what you believe in, or whether it's about helping you stay on guard to others excluding behaviour towards you. Another style might be that you try really hard to be liked and to fit in. Okay, so we're up to life trap number 5 now, which is the dependence life trap. This is a life built around needing others to do stuff, to go places, to take on new challenges. You don't feel that you're capable enough of doing these things on your own. So you might stay in your comfort zone a lot, avoid risks. You cling to someone else to do stuff, or if that person isn't there, you might just feel helpless and panicky a lot of the time. Okay. So at this point, you are hopefully making some notes about whether you seem to tick the box for any of these life traps. Let's just give you a quick rundown of what we've covered so far. We've covered number 1, the abandonment life trap. Please don't leave me. Number 2, the mistrust and abuse life trap, that people have ulterior motives. The emotional deprivation life trap, I'll never get the love I need. Number 4, the social exclusion life trap, where you feel like you just don't fit in. And the dependence life trap, where you just don't feel able to take care of yourself or do things on your own. So this takes us to number 6, which is the vulnerability life trap. This is like carrying around with you an underlying sense of dread that something awful and terrifying could happen at any moment. Now, this is a central feature of having been traumatized by something. You feel vulnerable to what might happen, so you are wary and hypervigilant, or you stay at home a lot for fear of attack or an accident. And this might stem from childhood, or it might be as a result of something that's traumatizing that's happened to you as an adult. Okay, number 7, the defectiveness life trap. People who suffer with defectiveness life traps carry around with them an underlying struggle with shame. They feel that if they get close to people, the other person won't like what they see, so they try to make sure that others don't see the real them. If this is you, you might hide your true thoughts and feelings for fear of being rejected or judged. You might show a more pleasing side of yourself, for example, crack jokes all the time. Or you might just feel awkward a lot of the time, not saying much, being overly polite, or trying not to be noticed. Life trap number 8 is called the failure life trap. This is about fearing future failures and feeling as though you are already a failure. When you look back at your achievements, you hone in on the mistakes you've made and you feel disappointed, guilty, or frustrated. When you think about these things, it can lower your mood or cause a lot of work stress and make you anxious when new challenges arise. You might overplan or prepare for stuff as a way of coping with this. You might avoid real challenges or take on job roles and activities that you really aren't prepared for. It's like you set yourself up for failing. Life trap number 9, the subjugation life trap. Subjugation. So this is when you give in to what you think others want. You're afraid that if you don't give others what they seem to need or want, that you'll be criticized or rejected. So you fear the punishment or the retribution. So you subjugate your own needs to those of others. Doing it their way looks like never making suggestions for things. Like if you're with some friends, they might ask you what you want to do and you always just go along with what they want. So you don't express your opinion. And maybe you hide what you really want to do. You might get into relationships with people who are controlling of you, who you allow yourself to be dominated by people who are already in your life. Maybe that's parents, friends, bosses, work colleagues. Okay. Number 10, the unrelenting standards life trap. This is the belief that you'll never be good enough, and good enough in terms of the things that you do. So to praise yourself is completely alien. Instead, you focus too much on what didn't go well, on the mistakes that you've made. So you might have perfectionistic tendencies. You might waste time putting things off because the challenge of being perfect is too demanding. Or you work your socks off trying to get it right, maybe repeating things over and over. So with this life trap, it can appear as though you're quite obsessive about your work. Okay, so that's number 10. And number 11 here now, finally, which is called the entitlement life trap. This is true of people that have not had boundaries growing up, not sufficient boundaries. It's often the case with the spoilt child. It's a sense that your needs are more important than others. So with the entitlement life trap, you feel better or superior to other people often. So you might bully others to get what you want, or you always look to win against other people. Or you feel as though others owe you something like their time, their attention, or their money. You often act impulsively because you can't tolerate the frustration of not having something right now, and because you've never learned to tolerate it. So you might treat others with contempt quite a bit. Maybe you complain a lot. Maybe you criticize others to get them to give you what you want. And you might struggle to limit things, limit your eating, limit your drinking, limit your spending. And you might not listen to others and focus on what they need. So relationships could obviously be quite a problem here. Having this life trap means that you focus too much on what you need and want, but because you can't help it, because you never learned to limit yourself. Okay, wow, okay, so well done for sticking with that. I've given you a brief overview there of 11 life traps. Now, this is a lot to get your head around. If I were you, I'd go back through this episode again so you can really understand what we've covered here. The transcript can help you do this as well. Hopefully you've picked up some pointers here, which life traps seem to turn up for you. And I take that as a very serious question. If things have resonated, if you felt like they fitted with some of the struggles that you have, take a few minutes to write them down if you haven't already. So that's pretty much it for today's episode in this mini-series. We've looked at what life traps are. We've looked at the coping styles people adopt that keep them stuck in these life traps. You've heard a description of the 11 different life traps that are highlighted in this book. And so now I want to make a small request of you. Please can you hit me reply on this page with the top 3 life traps you'd like me to focus on in future lessons in this mini-series. I've got an idea of those I think are more common, but I really want to give you, the listener, a chance to vote on them. So leave me your comments below with your top 3 suggestions from the 11 that we've covered today. And if you aren't sure, based on what you've heard, which life trap fits your difficulties, leave me a description of what happens, and I'll see if I can pinpoint that for you. And I'm in the process of developing some questionnaires for you to take online that can help clarify this for you. Check back in a few weeks when it should be up and running. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, today. If you like this episode, please go over to iTunes and leave us some feedback. So that's it for now. Thanks. See you again. Goodbye.